Welcome back, everyone, to another reaction video. Well, welcome back to me. This is actually my first video I am recording post trip to England, where I participated in a tour with some of the actors from Masters of the Air. Going to be doing a live stream this weekend where I'm going to talk all about it, while simultaneously working on building a Lego B-17. So that'll be kind of fun. Share all about our experiences with you. And I did shoot a couple of videos on that tour, so you can be watching for those. But I saw while I was gone that my friend Mr. Terry did a reaction to the channel Metatron and a video about was Nazism right-wing or left-wing. And it seems like a really interesting topic. This is something we've talked about before. I've never done a reaction to Metatron, so I didn't watch Mr. Terry's video, and I haven't watched the original video because I wanted to be able to do my own reaction to it. And I see that Metatron is at 914,000 subscribers as of today, which is late September 2024. So if we like what we see, and I know many of you are already fans of that channel, please consider subscribing. Let's push him over 1 million subscribers. It would be great to have some small part to play in getting him there. We love to support our original content creator. So I'll put a link in the description to the original so you can check it out. It's time to dive into this one. And I'll say up front, before we get into this topic, because I know this is one that likes to get debated, I would say it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. The reason people argue over whether Nazism was right-wing or left-wing typically boils down to their own political ideology and wanting to label it as not us, right? If you are conservative, you want Nazism to be left-wing because they're evil and terrible, and you don't want any association with them on your side. And likewise, if you are on the left side of this political spectrum, you love to point out Nazism being right-wing, and we start comparing anybody who's extreme right-wing to Nazis. The bottom line is it doesn't matter, and I think there's really the horseshoe effect at play here, which is that there are authoritarian, dictatorial regimes that can be on either side, and they actually have a lot of similarities, which is why sometimes those lines get blurred. But I'm getting way ahead of myself. Let's see what he has to say about it. Let's dive in.
Was Nazism left-wing or right-wing? Well, believe it or not, this question gets asked around a lot, and there are several creators that provided answers. Well, the thing is that today's answer will be grounded on history and political science. But before we do that, let's talk about the question proper. This question is a form of ahistorical syllogism. You'll see several people giving you answers today in the comments down below. The same people will not watch this video and they will type either obviously was right-wing or of course it was left-wing. In my opinion, there are two major problems here. One, they use the American left-right dichotomy or political spectrum and they forcefully apply it to historical European political regimes and ideologies. Hence,
so that's a great series of comments he just made there. Number one, the American political system today is different than the European political system today. So, for example, when you talk about right-wing, or let's say left-wing in the United States, a person who's on kind of the far left in the U.S. would not be that far left in Europe, where the entire window of right versus left is further to the left than it is in the United States. The United States as a whole is a more conservative politically country than many of the countries in Europe. So our standard of left and right is different. But the standard of left and right today, even in the United States, is different than it was 20 or 30 years ago, and is different than it will be 20 or 30 years from now. I talk often about myself being politically right, but even as I look at what that means over the last 20 years, where 20 years ago I probably was pretty far to the right, I'm probably more in the center today. And it's not that my politics have necessarily changed, but the country's politics have changed. And I find that the people on the right today are far to the right of where I am. So those are great kind of basic fundamental points to make in even starting this evaluation.
The first problem with the question proper is geographic or spatial in nature. Two, they use 21st century political spectra and juxtapose them over 20th century politics. Thus, the second problem is temporal. The incongruence between modern and 20th century political definitions within the right-left dichotomy is a complex phenomenon rooted in evolving socioeconomic shifting of global dynamics. Thus,
we talk all the time about party systems here in the United States and how they're constantly shifting. And so 100 years ago, what was right and left is not the same as today.
This discrepancy necessitates of a nuanced analysis of the factors that contribute to this divergence.
100%.
Within these dynamics, the correct and coherent answer is going to be fractal, as there is no clean definition overlap. History is a multidimensional phenomenon.
I wish people understood this. It's not black and white. It's not simple. It's always nuanced. It's always gray. It's always complicated. We love to make bad guy versus good guy. We love to make right versus left. We love to make one extreme versus the other.
Therefore, 21st century American political ideas to overlap neatly and perfectly with 20th century European political factions in order to come out with an answer is a flawed analytical method. So,
completely
the people
agree.
who are categorically stating it was left-wing, it was right-wing, are not answering to present a comprehensive analysis of policies, ideologies, historical actions, military interventions, economic, religious and social positions pushed by said regimes. They are just insulting the other side. They're free to do it, of course, but just so we are clear about what those answers are.
He's really just affirming what I said at the very beginning, which is the whole pointing out left versus right is just a way to demonize the side that you're not on.
No mistake, Nazi is a slur, and so people want to use it to identify and describe their political opponents. That is why, I would argue, it works as a conduit to the detriment of your political opposition when it comes to mass and public opinion. In this framework, fascism and Hitler currently have negative valence, they are derogatory, and with that established, the following coarsely represents the train of thought leading to this usage. Nazi bad. We all agree with that? Okay. You Nazi. You bad. It's a simple process, really. Clearly it doesn't require any deep empirical analysis grounded on historical political science, which is one of the reasons why the media uses the word constantly.
Listen, I don't know what his politics are, I don't know what his other videos about, but on what he has said so far, I could not possibly agree with him more.
Who would have thought the media's full of shit? You see, once you take that leap, your historical vision will be irreversibly tainted.
Oh, he's so right.
The question is flawed to begin with because its basis, namely the expectations and the prism of evaluation, are not in alignment. And on top of that, this has rendered the traditional unidimensional political spectrum increasingly inadequate for capturing the complexity of 20th century political parties. And all of this reflects the ongoing evolution of political taxonomy. So, what do we do now? Well, to answer this correctly, first, we need to ensure objectivity to our analysis. Focus on attitudes towards private property, individual freedom, and wealth redistribution patterns. If needed, even implementing a mathematical apparatus. Also, we should explore and take into consideration the political allegiances that occurred historically and the sort of opposition to the regime in question, the Nazis. So let's do that.
That's a great question. A good way to see what the ideology was in that context is to say who were they opposing and who opposed them. That'll give you a better context. And so, for example, we know that the Nazi Party was heavily opposed to Bolshevism, to communism. So, I mean, that gives you a little bit of context. If we consider them to, the Soviet Union to be left, then a natural enemy of theirs would be on the right, even though we know they're both authoritarian. And so if you think of that horseshoe where you have extreme left and extreme right, both authoritarianism, they're actually really close to each other, even though they're on opposite ends.
Welcome to our comprehensive qualitative analysis. Some people will use nomenclature as a gotcha moment to place the Nazis within the political spectrum. In other words,
picture there of Adolf and it looks like Ernst Röhm next to him there.
Nazism stands for National Socialism, so they were socialists, hence left-wing. Now, nomenclature alone cannot be used as the basis for classification. It's too shallow and unscientific as a parameter.
Yeah, for example, the Democratic Republic of Korea, North Korea, democratic, right? Not a chance. But using that name in the title makes it sound like something that it's not. Same thing's true with National Socialism.
This is regardless of whether you think they were left-wing or right-wing. Let me prove it to you. If the name of any given party is the basis of the argument of where they stand within the left-right dichotomy, then is the Communist Party in China Republican in the American sense? I mean, it's the People's Republic of China.
Yep.
Similarly, is the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, aka North Korea, really democratic? Yeah, didn't think so. And if you really want to break your brain, I made a video not too long ago talking about ancient democracy democracies, such as, for example, Greek democracy, which was a form of pure democracy, and then they compared it to modern democracies and to see what they differed. And
which now modern democracy is representative, it's not pure democracy.
What areas they had in common. Well, in the comment section of that video, as it happens, my American viewers began a flame war, whereby you had people saying, no, America is a democracy, and other people saying, no, America is a constitutional republic. Right. Well,
which is a democratic form of government.
You know what Italy is? Well, after the referendum of the 2nd of June 1946, Italy abolished monarchy and became officially, wait for it, una repubblica democratica. That translates as a democratic republic. Yeah, welcome to Europe. You think that's confusing? Well, in the United States, simple liberalism often means social liberalism, and a liberal is a left-winger. But in Europe, simple liberalism often means classical liberalism, which can be a center-right position, particularly for those right-wing populist movements that embrace economic policies which in America will be associated with the left, while at the same time promoting cultural and social conservatism. And on that note, since we're talking about what a party named itself, do you want to know what Hitler said when it comes to left or right? Well, Hitler denied that Nazism was either left-wing or right-wing. Instead, he officially portrayed Nazism as a, open quotes, syncretic movement. Yeah, let's ditch the whole name argument, shall we?
Yeah, he's 100% right on that, and that's usually the argument people use. It's in the name, therefore that's what it is.
So what do I propose as an alternative? Well, personally, I think that the best way to define Nazism is a totalitarian dictatorship. That's going to be our basic core definition to identify what we are talking about, instead of using the American left-right spectrum. Then, after having established firmly what Nazism is, we can then look at the policies one by one and decide from an American contemporary perspective which of these lean right and which lean left, based on their salience. Alright, that sounds good on paper, but let's try if it works. What defines totalitarianism? Centralized authority, strength in the military, militarism with resources directed to domestic population, authoritarianism and dictatorial rule, repression of freedom of speech and freedom of the press, systematic elimination of political opposition by violence, expansionistic foreign policies, and conquest through military might.
All of which can be either left or right. I mean, think about that. All of that pretty much applies to the Soviet Union at this time period, and it applies to Germany in this time.
Already note that all three historical totalitarian regimes of the 20th century fit very neatly within this box: German Nazism, Italian fascism, and Soviet communism. In other words, when we examine the practical manifestations of these 20th century regimes, striking similarities emerge. For instance, the lack of individualism and individual freedom. Benito Mussolini himself publicly stated that fascism is anti-individualistic and accepts the individual only in as far as the interests coincide with those of the state.
Which is something that anybody who's part of the Soviet regime would have 100% agreed with.
Well, yeah, but then again, communism, fascism, and Nazism might be considered quite different when it comes to their core ideology. So, Metatron, are you really sure that they would fit each and every single one of these? Okay, let me prove it to you. Number one, centralized authority. Absolutely, all three. Strength in the military. Do I even need to comment that? Militarism with resources directed to domestic population. Well, in the case of the Nazi, of course, that meant the Jews, and it meant gypsies, and every single person that opposed the Nazi regime.
But many of those Jews who ended up in Germany had fled the Soviet, what was then the Russian Empire, for similar reasons a decade or two before.
When it comes to Stalin, well, he murdered more of his own people than he did of his foreign enemies.
That's true.
Just putting it out there. Authoritarianism and dictatorial rule, repression of freedom of speech. But what about the freedom of speech part? And are we sure? Well, let me prove it to you. Let's do a little thought exercise. You are in 1940s Germany. You disagree with Adolf Hitler's opinions, so you go to Berlin, and in front of the whatever government building that they have there, you say, Hitler was an idiot. Yeah. Do you think you're going to survive that? And into the concentration camps you go. But what about Italian fascism? Well, you go to Rome and you state right in the main plaza, Benito Mussolini was an absolute moron. And there you go, dead in the prison. Well, you probably die before you even reach the prison, but if you do reach the prison, you'll die in there. And once again, let's teleport you to Soviet Russia. You are in front of the Kremlin and you say, Stalin, who is a monster. Gulag, immediate. No freedom of speech. Yep. In fact, freedom of speech is the first thing that goes when it comes to totalitarianism. make a dedicated video to that. If you appreciate my content so far and wish to help ensure my ability to continue to tell it how it is, regardless of any possible backlash, please support this channel on Patreon. Any support helps me and my team of academics keep the channel strong and gives us the means to fight back against the political rewriting of history. Stand with us, form the wall, defend the truth. So what this tells us is that these are not necessarily unique features of the right or the left, but they manifest as common ground on the extremes of said spectrum. It's the horseshoe effect. Extremes touch, even if, ideologically, when compared with communism, fascism is indeed right-wing. You have authoritarian control. Both Hitler and Stalin established it. It was absolute, centralized power. Propaganda and information control. I mean, the Nazis were quite famous for burning books, and a lot of those books were in fact communist books and socialist books, by the way. Terror and repression. And yes, mass executions were common on all of these regimes.
Yeah, I mean, he's making the point exactly. This is why it's really kind of a silly argument to even make, to try and prove one way or another if they're left or right. It really, as I said at the beginning, does not matter.
Now, in Europe, conventionally, Nazism is generally considered to be a far-right ideology, also due to their allegiances with the fascists in Italy and their countering of Stalin and communism, which is, of course, a left-wing extreme ideology. 22nd of June 1941 and the invasion of the Soviet Union should stand as a clear definition of that. Besides, under Hitler, the newspapers of the Social Democratic parties are banned, functionaries are arrested, and whatnot. But once you start to look at this from the American political perspective, then the situation becomes muddy, if you will, necessitating a more nuanced item-by-item approach. You see, the Nazis, for example, had nationalized healthcare. Government was deeply involved in every aspect of industry, so we're talking about big government. The Nazis were not in favor of free market capitalists. And yes, I'll defend this one in the next section. And all of this sounds left of center to an American. So, it is mixed. On the following section, I'm going to present the characteristics of the regime, and then you decide where it leans the most towards. This way.
So he makes a great point there about the American perspective versus, say, European perspective. In the European perspective, it's pretty much a done thing that healthcare is nationalized. And so I don't think it's really seen as a left versus right issue. Whereas here in the United States, nationalized or socialized medicine, as it's referred to here, is very much viewed as a left-leaning, a strong left idea that the right would very much oppose.
Way we can promote critical thinking. Now, Nazism was characterized by extreme nationalism, state-funded welfare programs. If there were any form of identity politics similar to contemporary political discourse, of course the Nazis would have been against it, but so would have been the communists. They had state control of industries, support for a strong military, and as we said, repression of freedom of speech. Alright, now let's jump into the economic policies. A central idea of communist ideology was opposition to private ownership of the means of production, which blended with economic intervention within the private and public sectors. Now, to that, Nazism was different up to a certain extent. Let me clarify. Their overall economic approach favored big business and opposed labor unions, which of course doesn't make it sound socialist by any means. But we also have to remember a very important factor to this. In Hitler's speeches from 1920s, he clearly established his idea of what National Socialism was going to be. And mind you, it was only for Germans. And as he outlined his party program, he stated, open quote, that nationalization appears to me to be wrong, close quote. So, at least in the 1930s, he was sort of in favor of the idea of maintaining private property. But was he? Well, I do have an opinion on that, but let me quote a sociologist and economist of the period. Check this out.
And this is good that he's quoting one from the period rather than from today.
Friedrich Pollock says, open quote, I agree that the legal institution of private ownership was maintained and that many attributes characteristic for National Socialism begin to manifest themselves, albeit still vaguely in non-totalitarian countries. But does this mean that the function of private ownership did not change? I believe it reaches far more deeply and should be described as the destruction of all the essential traits of private ownership. And I would like to underline that this specific economist saying the private ownership ownership actually wasn't a thing, is left-wing. He was a left-wing economist. Moreover, in 1934, Hitler clearly established the fact that to him, wealth was for the national social state, not for the individual. And yes, the individual could enjoy some of that wealth, but it's thanks to the state. And in 1942, when he was in power, he stated, open quotes, "The land was national property, and in the end, it's only given to the individual as a loan."
So I guess maybe the difference here is that with Nazism, there's the illusion of private ownership, whereas on the left, or the socialism, communism, they don't even bother pretending like there's any such thing as private ownership.
Does that sound like private property to you? There is more to it. In 1937, Hitler had already established the fact that he would demand private industries to produce something that the state defined as being necessary.
But you know what? Some of that went on in the United States as well. I mean, Woodrow Wilson nationalized the railroads, for example, during World War I.
They had two options. They either do it, which is great, or they don't, in which case the state will take control of that specific industry sector. It's not big government, that's massive government. Alright, but if that's the case, if this is what Hitler believed, and by the way, this is confirmed by SS letters, even all the way up to 1944, that was exactly his position, and we can see in the way he acted. But if that was the case, then why did he not say private property is abolished? I mean, the Soviets did it. Why did he say, no, private property is still a thing? Well, he said that because it doesn't matter what you say. It doesn't matter that legally there was still a definition for private property.
Yeah, you can say whatever you want if the de facto situation is different than that. It's about what you're selling to the public. It's about the aura that you're trying to put on. And they were always concerned about how it looked. I mean, that's why propaganda was such a huge mechanism within this regime.
As long as what he gets is what he gets. And besides, of course, he understood that in a moment of war, you can't fight outside and also fight inside with the private sector. So he made the statement, private property stays, but then they control all of it, including demand, production, means of production, prices, everything. The government tells you what.
But again, even in the democratic countries of this time, United States, UK, etc., there was a lot of that going on. Price controls, freezing people into their jobs, certain industries putting toward the war effort. Some of that was done voluntarily, but a lot of it was dictated by the government as well. Wartime is a completely different animal compared to peacetime. People like to point at Abraham Lincoln and say what a tyrant he was because of certain things he did in times of war, in times of rebellion. Would he have done those things in times of peace, which is what really, to me, determines what kind of a leader you are.
What to produce, who to buy from, and what prices you sell. In other words, at least from an economic standpoint, in the discussion of private property, this was socialism disguised as capitalism. Now, of course, when you compare it to the Soviet Union, that had a complete centrally planned economy, this doesn't sound as extreme. But then again, the Soviets had a main goal, which was to increase the military power of the state. Sounds familiar? Alright, now I would like to dedicate a small section to race, because of course this was not only a connection, so race and racism was a connection to, I want to say, Nazi ideology, but it was also a congenital element within the system. And another thing that the Nazis did was to put the blame of many of society's problems, particularly of the Germans, to immigration. Moreover, apart from the Holocaust, there was clearly a sort of differential treatment under the law.
I mean, they legit had laws down to what percentage, if a certain parent or grandparent was one thing, then that's the thing you were.
Based on your racial affiliation. Now, this is of course real. It happened. And we can see some of these themes, particularly the ultra-nationalistic ones, in modern-day far-right ideologies. With that being said, let's also remember that if you think that racism denotes right-wing position, then you would classify Karl Marx as a right-winger. And the reason I say that is because if you actually read the article he published in 1844 called On the Jewish Question, you would absolutely consider to be racist. And
think about that for a second. That's legitimately the phrase that was used by the German regime, the answer, to the Jewish question.
Also, Marx didn't really like Mexicans. That's another thing that he did. And Friedrich Engels said quite a lot of horrible things about black people too.
He made a great point there again. There's a difference between the modern idea about which side of the political spectrum that idea of racial superiority or purity or those kinds of things versus back then. Back then, it was something that was going on both sides. Today, it's very heavily identified with the right.
Now I would like to talk about an argument that is the one that shocks me the most, and it's the claim that Hitler was a Christian. Now,
whatever Hitler might have said about his beliefs, he was not a Christian. Look at the fruit. Look at how that was played out. It doesn't matter what he said.
Of course, I'm going to debunk this. I'm going to do it by, quoting from Hitler's own words with his own letters, and then we're going to look at how he changed his rhetoric before and after he became chancellor and then dictator. But before we do all of that, let me just say this. Do you really think that the leader of the most anti-Semitic regime the world has ever seen would have worshipped Jesus of Nazareth? Now, given one of the things that people say when they underline this idea that, well, Hitler was a Christian, is that they say that he was baptized as a Catholic. But I'd like to underline that not all Christian religions consider baptism or perform baptism the same way. I mean, differently from, for example, Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons, the Catholics baptize you when you are a baby. So it's not like Hitler had any say to it. If that alone, the idea of being baptized within the Catholic Church, is enough for you to say, well, Hitler was a Christian, that you should consider Stalin a Christian since he actually went to seminary. It was Orthodox, but still. Yep. Hitler's real intent towards the church was eroding the core doctrines of the Christian religion until there was virtually nothing left of its original function,
while leaving it in place.
In order to slowly substitute it with a puppet used for social control, which would also have followed with the confiscation of all the places of worship, something actually quite similar to what is happening today in China. So that alone doesn't really make me feel confident about, Hitler's Christian beliefs. Oh, and the fact that he shot quite a lot of Polish priests dead. There is that. You see, during the beginning of his political career, Hitler publicly expressed favorable opinions towards traditional Christian ideas. That's true. But later he abandoned them.
But when you're coming to power and you're slowly kind of doing the build-up to authoritarianism, you don't immediately come out and say everything that you're going to do. I mean, the final solution did not get implemented in 1933. It took some time to build up to that into the mid-1940s.
Most historians agree that he was adversarial towards organized Christianity. Oh, and he also criticized atheism, so he had a bone to pick with everyone. Now, if you examine some of his early talks, you'll see that he considered himself as a German Christian. He said, I'm not a Catholic, I'm a German Christian, and even a member of positive Christianity. Not member, but like a supporter of positive Christianity. But you see, positive Christianity is not even Christianity, as they rejected fundamental core doctrines of Christianity, such as the, divinity of Jesus. So
right, so it was really just about embracing like the teachings of Jesus, but not necessarily the fundamental core beliefs, as he says.
Not Christians. And when it comes to German Christians, it was a type of Protestant church or group that supported Nazi ideologies. That's why he said that. Thus, in Hitler's eyes, Hitler detested Christian ethics. He said it was fit for slaves. And in 1937, he publicly said that the Christian church or Christianity was ripe for destruction. And that doesn't sound like a Christian to me. So the idea that Hitler was a Christian is nonsense, and his ostentatious hatred towards Christianity wouldn't really work or go very well with, say, modern-day faith and flag right-wing Americans. With all being said, as you can see, there are many aspects to this. Yes, some of his policies were in fact right-wing, others would have been left-wing. If you were to take like one of those quizzes online, what you could do is try with your own, with your own understanding of these, you could try it and answer. Like every time you get a question, you could ask your question, what would Hitler respond to that?
That's actually an interesting
idea. You'll see that sometimes you go right, sometimes you go left. Therefore, Nazism should not be judged by whatever words Hitler crafted, and it should not be considered neither left nor right-wing, at least in the political sense. The only thing in which Hitler believed was accumulating personal power. And we have a name for that: totalitarianism. Thank you for watching.
That was really good. I could not agree with him more. I mean, there's some little things maybe that we could find disagreement with, but goodness, he hit the nail on the head. And what I said at the beginning turned out to have been exactly where he went with this, which is that it's ridiculous to try and say left or right. That's a tactic that is used by people to argue that the other side is practically Hitler. The other side are Nazis. And that's just not a beneficial way to look at this. It was its own thing. And in the end, it was totalitarianism, it was dictatorial power, and that's what we really should be looking at it as, not left or right. So let me know your thoughts. Use the comment section below. Let's keep it civil. Let's keep it on topic. We can make strong arguments. We can disagree passionately without being disagreeable, and I hope that's what you'll do in the comment section below. Thanks for watching.